So this is April 2019's paper 2. So here we go. Okay, it starts by saying yeast is a living organism. Write down 3 life processes. So there are 7 processes, and I believe the acronym for this is Mrs. Gren. So it stands for movement, respiration, can't remember what the S is. Anyway, so we've got 3 life processes. So let's start with respiration, reproduction, growth, that's the S, sensitivity. Nutrition, excretion, movement, that's it. Yes. The 7 life processes, you can remember them by remembering Mrs. Gren. Starts with movement, respiration, sensitivity. The G is for growth, reproduction, excretion, and nutrition. Okay. So it only says write down 3, so you only need to write down 3. I wrote down 7 so that you guys know which ones. Okay, so Louis Pasteur investigated the effect of yeast on grape juice. He mixed yeast cells with grape juice, and then he looked at a slide of the mixture using a microscope. He looked at a new slide of the mixture after 7 days. So describe one way the appearance of the slide has changed. So between this one and 7 days later this one, the one thing that has changed is there are more yeast cells. And explain the cause of this change in appearance. They've reproduced. Okay. If you guys have a question or you want me to stop at a question and explain it further, you're welcome to let me know. Okay. Question 2 says that Lily is in a lesson just before lunch. She's hungry and can smell the food cooking in the school kitchen. So now we need to answer some questions. So A, we smell food because particles of gas travel from the food. Which sentence is true about gases? So tick the box next to the correct sentence. So it's about gases. Forces between the particles are weak. That could be true, yeah. The particles are only able to vibrate. That's not true. This is solids. In solids, the particles are only able to vibrate. The particles form a fixed shape. That's also solids. The particles have very little energy. Not really true. So our correct one here is forces between the particles are weak. So what word describes how the smell reaches Lily? Circle the correct answer. Absorption, diffusion, dissolving, and mixing. Our correct answer here is diffusion. Diffusion, the definition is when gases move from a high concentration to a low concentration. Okay. C says, the smell from the hot food reaches Lily before the smell from the cold food. Explain why. Use ideas from particles. So the particles in the hot food has more energy. And if the particles has more energy, that means they vibrate more, they move more. So they will diffuse faster than the ones from the cold food, which has less energy and will therefore diffuse a lot slower. Okay, you can continue here by saying the particles in the cold food has less energy and will therefore diffuse slower. Okay, question 3 says, label the diagram showing the reflection of light by a mirror. Choose from these words: angle of incidence, angle of reflection, normal, incident ray, and refracted ray. Okay, so here is our picture. So we have our mirror here. This is the incoming light ray. This is the outgoing light ray. So this will be the incident light or incident ray. This will be the reflected ray. Because they are the words that we can choose from. So that gives us an idea. That must mean this is the incident or the angle of incidence. And this is the angle of reflection. And lastly, this is the normal. Okay. Okay, the diagram shows the female parts of a flower. So now they're going to be asking a bunch of questions about these parts. So this over here is the stigma. This is the style, where it goes down. Here we've got the ovary, that whole area, and that over there is the ovum, where the seed actually forms. And this back area here, I believe, is the pistil or carpel. So, where does pollination take place in the flower? Pollination is the moment when pollen from the male part of the flower sticks to the female part of the flower. So pollination takes place over here. Fertilization takes place in here. So this would be fertilization, number C. So what happens during pollination in the flower? Pollen from the anther gets transferred to the stigma of this flower. Okay, where does fertilization take place? That would be over here in number C, which is inside the ovary. Describe what happens during fertilization in the flower. So the male sex cell from the pollen travels down the style to the ovary. And there it combines with the ovum. There we go. Okay, question 5 says, Rajiv investigates the water content of some soils. Here is his method. So He measures the mass of an evaporating dish. He adds 20 grams of soil to the evaporating dish. He puts the dish of soil into a drying oven for 24 hours, measures the new mass of the dish and soil, and then does this with 4 more different soils. So what does he use to measure the mass of the soil in the dish? A scale. Okay, here are his. So sample A, before drying, it started at 126 grams, and after drying, it was at 125. And this is the mass of the soil and the dish. So that's that. So the amount of change, this 126 minus 125, is the amount of water that was essentially in the soil. So that's the change of mass, is the amount of water that was in it. So which soil sample contained the most water? That would be this one over here. So that is sample D. Write down one safety hazard in Rajiv's investigation and describe how he should avoid it. So the safety hazard here is the drying oven is hot. It's literally sort of like a kiln that you would put pottery in, except you're not baking it. You're just, you're literally just getting rid of the moisture content in it. So to avoid the hazard, Rajiv should wear oven gloves. When placing the soil in the oven, or when taking it out. Okay. Class 9 learns about colored light. The teacher tells them about color addition. She gives them a diagram showing equal amounts of the primary colors of light overlapping. Label the diagram with the correct colors. Okay. So this is light being added to each other. So here we've got their diagram. So right in the center, all of the colors of light added together, that gives us white. And now we've just got our 3 secondary colors here. Between green and red, we've got yellow. Between red and blue, we've got magenta. And between green and blue, we've got cyan. In your printers, these are the 3 colors that you would get: yellow, cyan, and magenta. However, light has green, red, and blue. Okay, so complete these sentences about making salts. So salts can be made by reacting metals or metal carbonates with an acid. When metals react with an acid, the products are a salt and hydrogen gas. When metal carbonates react with acid, the products are a salt, water, and carbon dioxide. Okay, this I went over in the chemical naming conventions lesson. Okay, so a group of bird watchers collect data to show how the numbers of farmland birds have changed over time. This graph shows the change in number of farmland birds between 1975 and 2015. So we start over here at about just slightly more than 40 birds. Then it rises up to just above 50 just before 1985, and then it steadily decreases in some way until about 2015, where we're just over 10 over here. So the data for each year was obtained from a large number of observations. Explain why it is a good idea to make a large number of observations. So our answer here would be it gives you more accurate data. Okay, the results in the shown graph are estimates. Explain why it is not possible to find the exact number of farmland birds. It isn't possible. To catch all of the birds and count them. You can't physically catch all of the birds in the world, put them in a big cage, and then count them one by one, letting them free. It's not going to work. So all of the data that we have are just estimates because we can only catch a few at a time, count those few, let them free, or literally sit at a place with some binoculars counting the birds that we see. So we can't be really sure about the actual numbers, but the samples do help a lot. So bird watchers measured the change in the numbers of farmland birds. Write down 2 factors that affect the number of farmland birds. So the amount of food they have, the amount of shelter they have, other ones that we can list here is the amount of predators, hunting the birds, pesticides. This could affect the food they eat, which then affects the amount of birds. So these could all be factors. They just ask you to list 2. Any 2 will do, as long as they make sense. So atoms are made up of 3 different particles. Complete the sentences about the different particles in an atom. The nucleus of an atom contains protons and neutrons. The nucleus is surrounded by particles called electrons. So the diagram shows parts of the periodic table. What is the chemical symbol for the smallest atom? So this is not testing your knowledge about what all of these symbols are. It's testing your knowledge about how you know the table looks like. So it goes from the smallest number, and then the numbers increase, going upwards like this, continuing down the table, getting larger and larger and larger, the atomic numbers. So the smallest atom would be hydrogen over there. So it says we can choose from these. So it's literally just testing to know that the smallest atom is that one that is normally put in that corner over there or over here or somewhere separate, called H. So which chemical symbol shows a metal? Okay, so this is testing whether you know the shape of the periodic table. You should know that non-metals are generally on this side and metals are generally on this side. So that tells us that our metal over here is sodium, or Na. Okay. Question 10 says, the diagram shows a food web in a field. So we start with grass, which then gets eaten by either mouse, rabbits, grasshoppers, which can get eaten by snakes or lizards or by a hawk. And the snakes and lizards can also be eaten by a hawk. Explain what is shown by the arrows in a food web. So that is the transfer of energy. Okay. Name 3 primary consumers in this food web. So primary consumers are the things that are eating the plants. The plants, so in this case grass, they're the producers. So these that eat the grass, they are the primary consumers. So here we can name mouse, rabbit, and grasshopper. So why is it difficult to classify the hawk as a secondary consumer? So here, depending on which branch of this food tree we follow, we can go from grass to rabbit to hawk, that's secondary. We can go from grass to mouse to hawk, that's secondary. But if we go grass, mouse, snake, hawk, that's a tertiary consumer, so we can't classify them easily as a secondary. So here we just need to give a counterexample. So if you follow the chain, grass, mouse, snake, hawk, then the hawk is a tertiary consumer. Okay. Name an organism that competes with the lizard for food. So if we go over here, our lizard eats the grasshoppers. So what other animals eat the grasshoppers? That would be over here, the hawk. So that's what competes with the lizard, is the hawk. Okay, off question here. Here's the rabbits are all killed by a disease. What effect does this have on the number of mice? Okay, so here our answer is less important than how we got to the answer. So I'm just going to erase this over here. Okay. So here's the rabbits. There's no more rabbits. So what's going to happen? So now we can go in two directions. We can go this way or we can go this way. So let's go backwards. There's no more rabbits, which means there's less things eating the grass. If there's less things eating the grass, we've got more grass. More grass means that mouse and grasshopper can become more. So we can get more mice, and we can get more grasshoppers. So that's following this route. Following this route, there's no more rabbits. What that means is that one of the hawk's biggest sources of food has now just disappeared. So the hawk is going to have to catch more snake, more mice, more grasshoppers, and more lizards. So if it's going to have to catch more mice, then the number of mice is going to go down. Hawks are carnivores, by the way. So we have two paths to follow. They are both correct. So our mark here is actually coming from our reason. So let's start with more mice. So the rabbits are no longer eating the mice's food. There can be more mice. On the other hand, we can have less mice. So since are no more rabbits, hawks will catch more mice. You don't need to give both of the reasons. You just need to give one. I'm giving both to show you here that the actual answer, the effect on the number of mice, whether it's more mice or less mice, is less important than the reason you give. As long as the reason you give makes logical sense, you will get your mark. Okay, so if you just said more mice because the rabbits are no longer eating the grass so the mice can have more food, then it's perfectly fine. It's a logical answer. You will get your mark. If instead of saying more mice, you said less mice, and you said, since there are no more rabbits, the hawks will have to catch more mice, and that is your reason, that is perfectly acceptable. You can also get your mark. So here, the mark doesn't go to this part. The mark goes to this part, your reason. Okay. So I hope that helps. We've got 2 minutes left, so let's see if we can do one more question. So question 11 says, Carlos uses the internet to collect information about the use of world energy resources in 2016. So here we have a pie chart of the resources. There's other renewables, nuclear, hydroelectric, natural gas, oil, and coal down here. So hydroelectric is a renewable resource. Write down the names of 2 other types of renewable resources. So wind and solar power are other renewable sources of power. So the pie chart will be different in the year 2050 compared to 2016, suggests 3 such differences. So here again, you need to use your logical common sense to try and figure out what's going to happen. So our first point here could be there's going to be less coal, oil, or natural gas since they will be used up. Okay. Our next reason could be, since these are going to be used up, our other kinds of resources, hydroelectrical resources and so forth, will increase. Okay. A reason here could be since it is renewable. Okay, our last reason, there's numerous reasons we can still give. We can say that our nuclear power sources may go down due to the fact that the current nuclear power stations are not very safe. Or we can conversely say that nuclear power is going to go up because more research into nuclear power is going to make the power stations safer. They're going to be more of a renewable resource. So we're going to see more of them. As long as you give a good reason, they will give you the mark. So we can also say other renewables are going to split into different kinds of renewable resources, like methane gas, solar power, wind power, all of these things. And then that is where we're going to get this. So I am just going to say that pretty much. So renewable resources will increase. Okay. And then we go on to question 12. So that is it for today.